Good morning, everyone. You hear the little jingle? That means it's time for Extra Shot. And today we have a very special guest. I'll introduce him in just a second. But I do want to remind everyone at home right now, or wherever you're at in the world, right? Because everyone can stream us now live from in your hand, on your tablet. Do leave comments. We're going to dive deep. We're talking vaccinations in your kids today before they go to school. And also having to do with the doctor in Florida. Dina will set up that story momentarily. But we want to know your thoughts right now. All hour long, we're going to be here for the next 30 minutes or so. So talk to us and let us know what you think about all of this, and we will chime in with the doctor's expert. So we have Dr. Hempstead. He's here from Kaiser Permanente. You're also a vaccine expert, and you're a pediatrician. So we have a question for you, but Dina, go ahead and set up the story.
Yeah, so Dr. Hempstead, thank you for coming in today. We appreciate it. Is my mic on?
I'm not hearing it.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me? Hold on, let's make sure you can hear me.
Okay, hello.
There we go.
Okay.
There, now
I was going to go help you out.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Hempstead, for coming in today. So we do want to start with the story that's out of Florida, which we're learning may not be so uncommon after all from our doctor. But basically, there is a pediatrician's office in Florida who has decided to say, I will not see any child who has not been vaccinated. So any kids who have been going to this office for a period of time in their life, this doctor's office is now saying, we're going to turn you away if you do not have your vaccinations. And the fear, of course, is that children who have diseases, who have things going on in their lives, are going to expose those who do not have vaccines to some of those risks. And so this doctor's office has decided to take it upon themselves. It's not the only one. There are a couple in Florida that have decided to do this, and we're also learning that this is not that uncommon for even doctor's offices here in California. So our question for all of you: how do you feel about vaccinating your children? I know there was a law that went into play last year here in California that now requires all children to get up to speed with their vaccines unless you have a religious exemption. But for doctors like Dr. Hempstead, you know, we want to know from your perspective, were you surprised to hear that a doctor's office has said, I will not be seeing any of your children if they don't have their vaccines?
So yeah, it may surprise some folks and some of the public and some parents. You know, this morning might be surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
It has become a more common practice. It depends a little bit on the geography. You know, it's a very diverse country that we live in.
Right.
And so some communities have more prevalence of that than others, but there are even some providers here locally that have just reached a point where they just don't feel like there's any other option for them, and that's really a shame.
Yeah. And we want to bring in some questions from our viewers too. I know that we've had a lot of people asking today online different things from the story that was posted. Some of those include people who are saying, I do not want to vaccinate my child because X, Y, and Z. And we got a viewer, Jennifer Lynn, who said, this is not something that I'm going to be doing with my kids because vaccines cause injury and autism. What is your response to somebody who thinks that?
Got it. Well, it's really important for us to all keep in mind that our goal is the same. Okay, so when we see parents and pediatricians coming together on this, we want to recognize that we both have the same goal, and that's keeping kids safe. And that's what I think kind of sometimes gets lost in the conversation. It becomes a little bit more of a debate or an argument, and then people get frustrated, and then ultimately, as we're talking about here, sometimes that frustration just escalates so much that the pediatrician in this case just has to, you know, take
matters into their own hands.
So that's what we're trying to avoid, right? That really doesn't serve, you know, the pediatrician. That really doesn't serve the family. We want all families to be able to get safe, good, quality medical care, right? So, in terms of the question, though, it's really, really tough on parents. There's so much information out there, and the average parent, any parent, really has a hard time digesting all of that, and it can be pretty easy to make, you know, basically scientific sounding arguments.
Right.
And then how is anyone supposed to know, well, this person sounds very reasonable and they have this concern, and I'm worried about something like autism or any injury to my child.
Right.
So of course, as the parent, I want to, you know, do everything I can to prevent that, right? So if I'm not really sure who to listen to, and I don't have that trust that I, you know, might wish I had with the doctor or with the medical community or whatever the case may be, then we lead into these doubts. So in terms of what I'd directly answer to that, though, that I'm very, very comfortable that this is something that it's a question that's been asked again and again and again over many, many years. And we have the ability to look over literally millions of children and ask one simple question. Is the child autistic, and did the child have vaccines? And when you're able to actually look at literally millions of kids, you have enough in each one of those categories to make a comparison, right? So you say, you know, with the group of kids, which is still small, it should be emphasized. I mean, I think it does sometimes get lost in the conversation that when a parent is very anxious or feels very passionately about this subject, they become a very loud voice. And I'll just call it the average parent hears that loud voice and has a lot of doubts. So most parents actually are very happy to vaccinate and are comfortable. So there are enough, though. We have enough kids when you look at millions that aren't vaccinated, and then you simply make that comparison. You say, well, how many kids in the vaccinated group have autism, and how many in the non-vaccinated group have autism? And it is fairly straightforward in that sense. And that kind of a study has been done in many countries over many years in many different ways. And of course, the answer is that the rates are the same, right? So the good news there is you can take a pretty simple and powerful approach like that and say, there's no added risk whether you have your shots or not. What sometimes happens, though, is if people have kind of skipped that step a bit, they can kind of get down into the weeds in terms of, well, but what about, you know, mercury, or what about some of these other kind of more detailed, more nuanced things that are a little harder to explain and are a little easier to create confusion around. And so they kind of get down in the weeds of, well, this person has this theory of why the vaccine could be doing this. And we sometimes forget, again, that bigger picture view of, well, but there really isn't even a correlation there. And even if there was a correlation, then it would be our job to figure out, well, what does that correlation mean? And is it really the shots, or is there some other variable there that could be going on, right?
So it's an ongoing investigation.
And that's another important point. So some folks worry that sort of once the FDA approves a shot, then our job is over. You know, kind of, you know, the hands are washed and we move on. And really nothing could be further from the truth. So there are multiple different ways that there is ongoing safety monitoring for all of these types of harm for every vaccine and the combination of vaccines that we keep doing every year. And so fortunately, again, we kind of keep asking that same question and we keep getting the same answer. Once you've instilled a fear, though, in a parent, it's very hard for them to
convince them the other way.
Come over that, right?
But here's the other side of this, right? So you have this pediatrician in Florida. The story came out. Parents are outraged because at one point in this child's life, they decided not to vaccinate them for said reason. You know, a parent doing their due diligence, making a decision, which it is their right. And then years later, this child gets sick. It wasn't the child's fault that they didn't get the vaccinations. Yet this child is sick. So who's protecting the child at that point? Isn't it the doctor's due diligence to accept that child into its practice and treat them like as a human being? I mean, because there are some people on that side, and we have, let me get up here to Jamie, who says, whether they are vaccinated or not, a child should not be refused health care. Shame on those providers. What is your response to that?
Right. So again, I truly can sort of sympathize and empathize with both parties, right? I can completely understand the desperation, frustration of the pediatrician who is basically saying, look, if we can't agree on this, I'm not sure what basis we have to move forward. And I understand that. I can, you know, I feel that. I'm not sure that the parents look at it that way. It's almost sort of this accidental side effect of that doubt, is the doctor can sometimes internalize that and kind of take it personally and say, well, if you're not willing to listen to me or believe in me, then why would I, you know, try to work with you?
I have the right to refuse?
Right, exactly. But you're absolutely right. In the grander scheme of things, as sort of the house of medicine, as pediatricians, that's not really serving folks.
Kids.
What about are there any specific dangers, though, associated with having kids who are vaccinated around kids that aren't? Because you hear a lot of the conversations where some parents won't even let their kids hang around with other childhood friends because they're not. So maybe can you just highlight a couple of issues that are things that we should be aware of if that is the case?
Right. So you can take it a step further even. So imagine you've had your first baby and you're in the waiting room for your first pediatrics appointment, right? And guess what? The person sitting next to you just took a trip out of country, chose to not vaccinate, has measles, doesn't know it, and is sitting next to your newborn. Now your newborn's not old enough to get a measles shot. They're totally unprotected. Or let's say, you know, your son has leukemia. Same situation, right? Sitting next to you waiting for your doctor's visit, and someone has brought in a disease that your child is no longer protected from because they're on chemotherapy. Imagine your fear, right? So we talk about fears, and again, they kind of work on both sides of that equation.
Right.
That if I have an infant, if I have a special needs child that has a weakened immune system for some reason, or leukemia or something like that, then ultimately I'm relying on the rest of you to protect my child. And so you can, again, bring that back to the doctor's office, which, I mean, is a legitimate concern, that if I continue to accept you as a patient, and I know that you're unprotected, and that you could bring, say, measles into my office, and the newborn gets it, well, whose responsibility is that? Do I bear some burden there too?
So in a way, is the doctor saying because in most parents' eyes, the reason why they vaccinate is for their own kids.
Right.
So in a way, is this doctor saying you're vaccinating your kids, for other people, to prevent diseases for the other guy who does not have the means to have this vaccination for X, Y, and Z reason. They're trying to protect other people,
It's their
to
form
not
of
just
defense.
this own person's child.
Exactly. And that can be the hardest spot to accept for the individual parent.
Because
though,
that falls
right?
then on you to help other children when maybe you don't necessarily agree.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all about the safety of my kids, right? I mean, that's primary.
Right.
And so having someone step outside of that to think about that other person's child, you know, intellectually they can completely understand, emotionally, it's still like, hey, you know what? Then someone else needs to figure out a better solution. My solution for my child is this is how I want to keep them safe.
Right.
So, you know, it's not that anyone wants harm.
Sure.
But again, you know, in defense of what you know, one of those pediatricians would say if he or she was here, I think that's what would come up.
Right.
It's not just the frustration and the trust. There are some potential safety issues, which comes back to the law in the schools, right? It's the same thing. It's, you know, yes, you have a certain amount of rights as a parent about what you want to do for your child's health, and we have certain laws like seatbelt laws that we have agreed as a society are there to protect all of us.
Sure.
So you may individually disagree with that, and we have to figure out as a society where that balance is.
Right.
And if my child has gone through leukemia and is going to go back to kindergarten, I do want them safe.
Right.
You know?
We have some more people chiming in.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who understand where you're coming from, appreciate you being here. So shout out to everyone who is talking to, essentially.
everyone.
Dr. Hempstead, you're doing a
Yeah.
great job, by the way. Thank you for answering all
Yes,
these questions.
definitely.
Sarah Hale, thank you for chiming in as well. She has an interesting perspective, and she would like to know, can you talk about the numbers of vaccines added to the schedule and the fact that vaccine manufacturers have no liability if your child has a reaction? Talk about the financial interest of the pharmaceutical companies. Parents, not doctors, are responsible for medical decisions for their own children. So when it comes to Big Pharma, you're talking about that. People are saying, well, is this just a big scheme by the pharmaceutical companies out there? What is your response to that?
Sure. So thanks, Sarah. We are glad that you're here. This is a great opportunity to.
It's a Q&A with the doctor. That's great.
It's wonderful. This is. I mean, these really are the conversations we hope to have, and we don't want to break down. So if this is one more way to do it, then that's great. So there was a lot there to Sarah's question. You might have to remind me about a few of them. So let me take the Big Pharma part first. So that is a common concern from parents, that again, in this modern society, we're not quite sure, again, where to place our trust. It all comes back to that part of the equation.
And that's someone else just said, who do I trust, the doctor or the theory?
Who has my best interest, my child's best interest.
Right.
So there's a couple different important parts of that. So, I mean, I'm pretty blessed in the sense that I do spend quite a bit of my time working about vaccines and vaccine communication.
Sure.
And so I personally am lucky enough to really have that information truly at my fingertips and literally know the people at the CDC or at our vaccine research center at Kaiser Permanente or other places like that that are truly national leaders that I personally know and have conversations with.
Right. And we picked the right person for this interview.
We have a great liaison here.
So I'm simply saying that to recognize that not everyone has that, and when you do have that, though, you do start to realize that there are a lot of amazing people in this field, many thousands of people in this field, and then tens and tens of thousands of pediatricians, nurses, other healthcare providers that are all in one way or another involved in vaccines. So to me, the better question isn't necessarily debating the goodwill of the pharmaceutical company. I think that can be a pretty thorny issue. I understand that level of the concern. My response to that, though, is to consider the other tens of thousands of individual people, such as myself, that work very intimately with vaccines, that frankly would all kind of have to be part of, for lack of a better word, of conspiracy. And the question then becomes, well, what is sort of more far-fetched, right? Is there truly a conspiracy that people like me are involved with, and I'm somehow gonna pocket some extra money, and get a kickback, and boy, I'm sure they're happy that I'm here today talking about this and all this type of thing. And of course, no, I don't get any money from this. And so I'd invite people to try to take that step back and look at that bigger picture. And again, coming back to that trust issue, that you'd have to believe that not just me, but really all pediatricians, all people involved in this aspect of medicine, wake up in the morning okay with the fact that we're going to harm a child, and we're going to make money doing that.
But by not treating a child who never chose to be vaccinated, this was a parent's decision, is that harming a child?
Right. So that's the great debate. I mean, that is a truly excellent question. And I think sometimes, I would imagine, this is not, by the way, my policy in terms of dismissing families, nor do we do that throughout Kaiser Permanente. We have 1,000 pediatricians in Northern California alone, and that is certainly not our response to this issue. But it becomes a great ethical question of where do you draw that line. And I would imagine that in some of these situations, parents in the end do vaccinate, and then you get a little bit of a do the ends justify the means kind of discussion, and I'm sure as a parent that does not sit well with anyone listening, that no one wants to feel that they've been bullied, for lack of a better word, into a decision.
That's what this parent felt, that they were being bullied by the medical provider in Florida, saying, come back when your kids are vaccinated. And this parent felt like they were being forced into a decision that they didn't want to make for themselves.
Absolutely. And I will be perfectly blunt. I feel that I run up against that tension probably every day.
Now, do you see this as something that's going to continue to happen, especially with now you have a lot of just not medical theories and science, but you have people who are trying to take a more holistic approach to the ways of living with organic foods and not wanting to do anything that's very chemical based. So do you think going forward now you're going to see more people choosing to not have their kids being vaccinated for schools or just in general?
That's certainly not what we've seen. Vaccine hesitancy is really not new. We do, again, with the advent of the internet and people being able to kind of have a loud microphone to speak from, I think that it's become more in the public consciousness. Overall, the numbers are actually really, really good and reassuring, though. So for most vaccines nationwide, we are well into the 90s in terms of percent of kids that are protected. So again, we want to be careful not to kind of accidentally present this as most people are worried and most people are refusing. It's certainly the opposite. So I should clarify what I just said a moment ago about that tension. That tension, though, is many parents are great advocates like you're describing, and we are thrilled about that. right? So we don't want folks just going with the flow and doing whatever they're told. We want people advocating and thinking outside the box and thinking, what is the next step to improve my child's health? Is it eating better? Is it exercising more? Is it mental health? You know, what else can I do? So that we should all be celebrating. And yes, it does lead to some more questions, right? So people are questioning more, which is fantastic. We just have to figure out the way to have those discussions. And so that's that tension is, I get those questions every day, and there's that balance. So the tension is, I want to make it crystal clear that vaccines are perfectly safe and are absolutely necessary. So that has to be crystal clear. If a parent that sees me, especially with multiple kids, hears that every time I see them, at some point they might feel a little bit of that tension. They might, begin to feel slightly bullied about it. Like, man, Dr. Hempstead, he will not let up on this.
Vaccines,
right?
Yeah.
and my patients have gotten used to that, I think, over the years. But that's that tension that gets created a little bit. Is yes, I'm going to bring it up every time. That's my job.
Where did the stigma come from? Where's the root of that? As someone who's an expert in the field, when did you guys, as experts, have to start saying that to your patients every day so it could sink into their head that it is, according to you guys, safe and sound to vaccinate your children?
Yeah. There's a couple answers to that. I find it really interesting. I'll keep it brief, but always, in a sense. So you can look back, so the first vaccine that was really made was for smallpox. And so that's 100 years ago. But you can go back and look at the media of the day, and you'll see these cartoons of people turning into cows from receiving this smallpox vaccine, which was derived from cowpox. Okay. And so from moment one, there is something hardwired in us that says, don't inject me with something that is foreign. We are sort of built, for probably very good reasons, to survive better with that type of thinking. Do not eat the berry that is poisonous, right? And this is just a further reflection of kind of our deep psyche of, do not inject something into me that may be foreign. So that is kind of fundamental to the whole discussion and was there from day one. With that said, a lot of what we see today ultimately ties in to a lot of people's concerns about neurodevelopment and autism.
Correct, and we're getting a lot of questions.
A lot about autism.
So that has a couple of reasons. One is that autism itself, of course, has much greater numbers now than it did a generation ago, and we could spend time if we need to on that whole part of the equation. But as the amount of diagnosis of autism has gone up and the public consciousness about autism has gone up, so have too the fears. And there was a specific Dr. Wakefield in England that about 15 years ago had proposed a potential link between vaccines and autism. And so you kind of had this kindling there that was dry, and he kind of threw that match on there. And again, imagine yourself for a moment as the parent of an autistic child. And autistic children are wonderful and very challenging, right? So if I'm dealing with the pain and desperation of wanting to know why this has happened and how I can maybe prevent it in another child, that is extraordinary amount of emotionally charged energy for good reason. And so if I think for a second that I've found the answer and I can help prevent that, then of course I'm going to sing it from the rooftops until everyone has heard my concern. So that is a completely understandable concern. We feel very comfortable that we've answered that concern.
Actual hard evidence saying that vaccines do not have a direct correlation with autism.
Exactly. And so we talked about that before. I mean, again, there are many different ways to answer that question, and that was kind of the simplest, biggest way to answer it, is there just isn't correlation. Again, if over 90% of the population has had the vaccine, then more than 90% of autistic kids had the vaccine. And so it's very easy for most of those parents to at least wonder, right? Well, yeah, my child did have this vaccine, and they do have autism. how do I separate the two?
Now, one question we're getting a lot of is, do you allow parents to read what's actually in vaccines? So is there some type of pamphlet that they get before the child is injected with the vaccine that says, hey, this is what's in it, these are the ingredients,
Yes.
Go do whatever you wish, but giving you this information just to have?
Right. So to an extent, that's actually part of our legal obligation when we give a vaccine. But let me be a little more clear. So there's a standard handout called a VIS, a Vaccine Information Statement. So that is given out whenever we give a vaccine. Now, that is a little different though. I mean, this is getting into a little bit of detail, and that's fine. That's different than the package insert. So just like any medication that you've ever picked up, you can pull out that, big piece of paper with a lot of words on it. And absolutely, parents will occasionally ask for the package insert. We are more than happy to give it to them. I'm not sure exactly what a parent is really supposed to do with that information. I do not want this to sound remotely patronizing, but to me it's like, kind of knocking on the cockpit of the 747 and asking to see the flight manual, and then giving the pilot some advice on how to take off in this wind. I don't know how you do
Like you're
that.
not an expert.
Right.
Therefore,
it's really, really hard. And again, that goes back to all this information out there, right? So I can pull out a package insert, or I can do some deep dive on the internet, and I can find things like there's formaldehyde in some vaccines.
people say mercury, aluminum.
Mercury, aluminum. So there's formaldehyde in vaccines. Okay, we're done. No way. Am I putting formaldehyde in my kid? Nope, nope.
Right.
End of discussion, right? Because formaldehyde, that's bad. Don't they preserve dead bodies with that? No, no, no. We're done, right? So the package insert would tell you something like that. What you don't get from the package insert is, well, by the way, these are the amounts, which are smaller than a lot of folks can really kind of put context on.
They just see the word and they
They
think,
see the
nope.
word, right? And it's nope, no formaldehyde. And you could then maybe stop for a moment and realize, well, our bodies are actually making formaldehyde every second of every day. And we already have formaldehyde in our system. And that's just part of our biochemistry. Oh, okay.
So unless you have someone to answer those questions for you
Right.
at the time.
Which goes back to the trust, right? So if I'm, reading a blog by someone making a very impassioned plea, my child was harmed by this vaccine because of mercury, aluminum, whatever
Right.
you want to come up with, that sounds very important to pay attention to. And who do I then trust to put context to that?
Can I ask you a quick question?
Please.
So I know Cornelia asked if you're going to start to see more people not wanting to vaccinate, and I was at the state capitol last year when all these parents were rallying saying, do not make this a law, allow me to make this decision on my own.
Right.
Don't legislate everything. My other question though is, do you think more clinics will start to say they will not be treating children with no vaccines? I mean, do you see it going in that direction eventually? We've already made it a law in California that you
Right.
have to have your vaccines to get into school. Do you see more medical experts taking the approach of, okay, no vaccines, I won't see you?
Right. So there is a little bit of a contradiction in there somewhere, right? So if we've made a law to make this happen, then why would we need to dismiss families? So we should probably take a moment to explain what might sound a little confusing there, right? It sounds a little bit contradictory.
Exactly the case in Florida, right? The law is that what is the law? Do we know the law in Florida? Is it the same as California?
I
And
know
if we're there
It's
and a doctor's
not the same as California. You got me a little off guard with that one, so I want to be a little careful to not quote it. But California has one of the strongest laws. With this latest addition to the law,
Right.
we have one of the strongest laws in the country. So I believe there are still some level of exemptions in Florida. And actually, you did happen to mention for viewers that were here at the beginning of the show.
The religious exemption.
Yeah, and there actually isn't. So that was actually the
Oh,
main.
right. That's what changed.
Yes,
in
exactly,
California.
exactly.
In Florida, there still are religious exemptions.
I
That's
believe
okay.
you're correct. Yes.
Got it.
So you would think, okay, well, wait a second. Why are we even having this discussion? There's a law. Well, as the viewers know, it's not quite that simple, and for two simple reasons. One is, not all vaccines are covered by that law. So there's a certain core set, which is the majority of vaccines, that are covered, that again, as legislators, they decided are the most important to legislate on. And that's not all of the vaccines. And that's primarily for school-age children. It does actually apply to daycare as well, which many parents may not realize. But it's not just about school, it is about daycare centers. And people could choose to homeschool or do something else, or again, only get the vaccines that are absolutely required by law. And then as the pediatrician, we're stuck with this issue of, yeah, but we're missing some of the most important ones. Like flu vaccine comes to mind. That is not part of the law. You do not have to have a flu vaccine to attend school. Yet, I know that that's actually the disease that hospitalizes and kills the most kids per year compared to every other shot that we give. So as the pediatrician, I'm feeling very compelled to have parents vaccinate, even with the law in place. So there's plenty of other opportunities where we might come to a disagreement where we're still able to follow the law. But again, ultimately parents, it may not feel that way to the average parent, but ultimately no one is strapping your child down and vaccinating them. They're simply saying, for you to attend school and for the safety of the other children, these are the requirements.
And we're going to have to stop you right there. I'm so sorry, but thank you for this conversation. We are live. Dina is anchoring the 9 o'clock newscast. So thank you, Dr. Hempstead, for everything, for your, like you said, your vaccination expertise today. A ton of questions answered. Thank you, everyone, for chiming in. If you still have questions and we see that influx of questions, we can continue this conversation on a video, and we will post it on our personal pages. So thank you again, everyone. We will see you tomorrow right here on Extra Shot. But tune in right now, ABC 10 on television, and watch Dina for ABC 10 News at 9. Have a good day. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for coming in. We
You're welcome.
appreciate it.